Hi, welcome to North and South podcasts. This is Tim. This is the first of our politics podcasts. The definition we're using for politics is not just to do with traditional power structures and government structures, but how power is distributed around society, economically, socially, culturally, as well as politically. Today, I am speaking to a former prison officer who I'm going to call Charlie. He is from the northwest of England and worked in a prison in the north of England. He was willing to use his real name, but I thought it might be better to protect his anonymity. Me and Charlie talk about the role of the prison, life inside the prison for prisoners, what it was like being a prison officer, the impact of austerity, and why he left the prison service. And we started off with me asking Charlie why he became a prison officer in the first place.
Well, first of all, I wanted to join the police or some sort of public service. I was really interested in being in some sort of public service. Eventually, hopefully, being in the police or something along those sort of lines. And the job came up in a city, and it looked really interesting. I thought, that looks really good. Be good for the CV. Be a really interesting job. Get some experience to take on further down the public service sector, and meet some good people, and hopefully just see what it's like. Really, didn't think anything about it being like dangerous, or just thought it'd be a pretty good job and a pretty stable career to start and get into.
It's good. So I'm kind of getting the idea that public service was important to you, the idea of doing good in society. As opposed to just like getting a job for the sake of it. Was that important for you?
Well, yeah. Well, after uni, I didn't want to just have a job where it was just a job, where you just want to turn up and do your bit, clock in and clock out. I didn't want to do that. I was more interested in grabbing life by the horns, or the bull by the horns,
Yeah.
and just getting on with it. But I was more interested in actually doing things and helping people. That's one of the main things in life, is just to try and help as many people as you can in the job you are in. And didn't really want to work for bloody TK Maxx or Asda, and just, I didn't want to clock in and clock out. I'd done a little bits of jobs here and there, but I didn't want to be in a job where it just seemed a bit more meaningless. I don't know.
Yeah.
No,
I understand that. I think public service is shining through there in what you're looking for. What exactly was your job then? What does a prison officer do? We're going to talk about maybe promotions later, but what does a prison officer do? What's like the CV, the basic role of a prison officer?
Well, if you was to put it in like a couple of words in a sentence or so, you'd just be saying like to maintain the safety and the well-being of people in custodial environment. That's what the dictionary would say, but my job was to go in as a prison officer. So you'd unlock prisoners, you'd make sure they're all right, make sure the well-being's good, make sure the fabrics of the prison was maintained, and interact with prisoners, make sure problems are solved each day, so day-to-day problems, but make sure the running of the prison was sort of maintained.
So is that like, that's the theoretical side of things, the kind of CV role, obviously, you know, how things are in theory and how things are in reality are always slightly different, and they both inform each other. But, I mean, it does sound, I went on the government website about prisons recently, and it was quite interesting, like how they describe prisons.
Yeah.
You know, as if like, oh yeah, if you come into prisons, we'll look after you, kind of thing. So obviously there's that theoretical side, and then there's the reality of the situation. Are you given a particular area of a prison that you're responsible for, a particular role?
Well, yeah. In the prison, you're assigned a role. So in the prison I was in, there was certain wings you'll work on. There's residential units. Yeah. So it'd be like A, B, C, D, or E, or F, and you'd be assigned a residential unit. There's also operations that deal with like visits and things like that. But usually when you just first start, you're given a residential unit. So say A wing or B wing, and then you'd go in, you'd turn up on the day, like as a normal job, pick up your keys and your baton and your radio, and you'd walk in the prison, and then they give you a job. Your manager will be on the day, or your supervising officer will be on the day in your residential unit. They tell you, right, this is your role for the day. So you might be on a different landing. You might be on in the prison I was in. There's 3 landings, so be a bottom, middle, and top landing. It was called 2s, 3s, and 4s. So you'd be given a landing, or you're going to supervise medication, and exercise, or you'd be a movements officer who supervise sort of like the movement of prisoners within the prison, or external prisoners coming to your wing, or people coming from reception coming to your wing, and you'd move prisoners to their workplaces as well. So you basically were just coming in. The day-to-day life to just do your job was like, say you're given a landing, and then that landing would be yours for the day. You've got to look after vulnerable prisoners on that landing. So you've got to make sure you've got to check on them. You've got to unlock people for work. Make sure all your doors are shut. So if anything happens, then you can deal with it. Make sure you've unlocked all your prisoners for work. And then you'd start getting association and things like that once people had gone to work, and then you'd get everyone back in on the day as well. Feed people. And you're basically just opening and shutting doors all day.
Yeah.
That's what your main job was. Yeah. Opening and shutting doors and dealing with people.
How much training is required before, let's say you get a job as a prison officer, how much training is there before you're actually walking around the wings? Or would you work with a supervisor who you shadow?
So what you do is, you do 10 weeks on like a sort of a training centre. I think there's one in near Rugby.
Yeah.
Down like sort of so far away. But you can have local ones as well, and I did a local one, but they don't take you into the prison. You learn about more legislative like sort of information, and then you'd learn how to use a radio, how to use phonetic alphabet and call signs, things like that. You learn how the different sort of, there was things called ACCTs and they're called acts. You've got to learn how to fill one of those in for like vulnerable people who were like on sort of what a general person would call suicide watch, or like they're going to be in harm to themselves. You'll learn how to use them, fill in things like that, fill in any sort of information sheets, which you use day to day. If anything, incidents occurs, you've got to do incident reports. Anything like that, that's what you learn in the 10 weeks. But you wouldn't actually step foot in the prison. You learn how to inundate cells in case there's a fire, open and shut doors in cells, how to do your accommodation fabric checks within cells, and do a minimal cell searching. And that was basically your 10 weeks training.
By fabric, you're talking about like just the setup of the prison. You know what I mean? Like the fabric of the prison is like the general well-being of the prison, the smooth running of the prison. Do you learn self-defence in those 10 weeks? Or?
Yeah, so you do about a week's worth of sort of self-defence, and how to handle prisoners.
Is that quite intense, or is it quite simple once you've learned?
It's quite straightforward, but because it's not like you're learning how to fight prisoners one-on-one. You're not learning how to do that. You're learning how to manage in a team of people, how to deal with somebody. If you're kind of situation one-on-one in a prison, it's all about self-defence and how you're going to get it. If you're kind of one-on-one situation, just try and call for help, and then defend yourself as best you can until help comes.
One of the things I just want a situational thing that I've seen, say, on TV dramas, and I know that one of the things I'm going to ask you actually is what you think is the most realistic depictions you've seen in media, because I'm a teacher. Some of the stuff I see in the media about teaching is just absolutely ridiculous, like the dramas you see, etc. Very far-fetched. But I often see scenes on TV where there's prisoners who are out of their cell socialising and walking around, etc. And there's like 1 or 2 prison officers. And I've often thought, if a situation happened, like 2 of them started having a fight in that situation, what would you then do if it's clear that there's a situation that those 2 can't manage? What's the immediate response to that, if you know what I mean?
So if you find 2 prisoners fighting, the first thing you do is shout staff or blow your whistle. But in my prison, we didn't really blow whistles, you just shouted staff as loud as you can. Obviously, you're going to bark orders at the 2 people fighting, tell people to get back, and then you call over the radio or personal alarm. If he sort of back up to come.
Would back up then try to get people back in the cells and lock the doors while that situation was...
Depending on the situation and where it is, if it's two prisoners fighting, that's obviously going to cause more prisoners to fight. Or if it's going to spread, then that's when they start putting prisoners away back into the cells.
Yeah.
If it's just an isolated incident where there's two prisoners fighting and two teams of four can then just grab him, like...
Yeah. What's the situation whereby if a prison officer's trying to stop a fight, other prisoners can maybe like get keys, or do you have a little system to stop that kind of thing happening? Or is it just deal with the most immediate threat at that time?
Just deal with the most immediate threat. Usually prisoners are not after like getting your keys because they know they're not really going to get anywhere for starters. It was very minimal effort from the prisoners to actually get any equipment off you. But if some prisoners, sometimes a baton would go flying across the floor, some prisoners would pick it up and give it back to the staff and here's your baton back.
Because there's no point in keeping it really.
There's no point in keeping it. If they get found with it, then they get taken to a segregation unit, moved, anything like that. They're just usual general people would just give you equipment back. If there was an incident where your keys had gone missing, if the keys had gone missing, you don't know where they are, and they're on the wing, lock the wing down. Every cell has to be searched until the keys are found. No one can get out. So that's why they don't want to get.
They don't want that, do they?
The sort of the prisoners, they want their time out in the cell. They want the regime. They want the routines. They don't want to be like disrupted. So their best interest is to like work with staff most of the time.
And you know, like most things, most of the prisoners just want an easy day-to-day life.
And like they don't want. If they are doing anything dodgy or bad, they don't want to highlight anything on the wing. They want to keep it sort of like in-house. But if like a prisoner got keys and they weren't found, or a prisoner got keys and it was started to like sort of getting serious, you're going to riot here, or the protocol would be to leave the wing, lock the doors, and on the doors. So you got a lock on a door. I can open the door with my key. So you have a set of like 2 or 3 keys. There'd be a key for external doors. There'd be a key for internal doors, and then there'd be cell keys, and then there'd be like suite keys, which are like your keys that you get in like cupboards and sort of like your offices and stuff. So a supervising officer and like your managers, they pick up different keys. They've got double lock keys where they can put a key in a door, lock it, and your keys are overridden and you can get out. So they close down the wing by overriding the locks. And that's what they do.
Do you know when you first actually go on the wings, do you have people with you all the time for a certain amount of time, or is it basically like, you go on and you learn as you're doing it, you have supervisors who keep an eye on you, but you basically just get on with the job?
When you first start the job? So when you've done your 10 weeks training and you've done remember when we college, use of force training, you should do your week or whatever. You go onto wing then, and what you're supposed to have is about 1 or 2 weeks where you shadow another officer. But usually you ended up just doing the job.
Get on with the job.
It really is one of them jobs where it's like a bit like doing a crash course for a car driving test. Like if you pass your test within 2 or 3 weeks of like having a car, you don't know how to drive, do you? You know how to pass a test. And that's what they were doing, they was making you pass a test. As soon as you get on the wing then you have like 1 or 2 weeks where you just shadow another officer. You're not supposed to open doors and things like that, but you'd end up just doing the job and helping out. And you just learn on the job then. And
what is there a qualification requirement to become a prison officer?
There's nothing. You just need very limited maths and English.
Maths and English. What kind of promotions are available in the prison service, and did you take any of those promotions, and if so, after how long?
You go in as a band 3. You can be the supervisor. So you'd be then like the residential units would all have assigned managers and supervisors. So you could become a supervisor, which is a bit of increment of money, and then you'd be you basically just look after the regime of the wing then. So you're managing other staff to just go, right, you're doing this today, you're doing that today. And then they deal with like any more problems that the prisoners deal with, like, so if prisoners need things sorting out that sort of officers can't do, I don't mean anything like bad or anything. It's just more like they can. There's a system in prisons where it's like an incentive to be good. So they got it's called IEPs and things like that. They call it incentive earned privileges, and they'd be running all that sort of on the computers, and they'd be putting people on like enhanced. So there's three systems you can have. You have basic prisoners who've obviously been naughty somehow, or got in fights, or been caught with something. They get the TV taken out the cell, and they go on the bottom landing, and it's pretty rough living for a bit. And you can be like at that on basic for like a month, and then there's a standard prisoner who what you usually go in prison as, and then there's enhanced prisoners who work for enhancement, who get extra visits and things like that. That's what they'd be dealing with mostly, and telling staff what to do. And then there's managers who have assigned also residential, and they just attend meetings and things like
policy and all that.
Yeah, and any overarching problems in the residential, they get assigned like 2 or 3 residential units. So there's any overarching policies, or they attend meetings with the governor every morning.
By residential units, you mean within the one prison?
Yeah. So like in my prison, there was 6 wings. There'd be 3 managers for each residential unit. Then there'd be a manager for operations, which are like your visits, and your security staff, who are then doing like taking prisoners out to hospitals and things like that for visits to hospital. And then there's another manager for segregation unit and the first nights and reception, which is like another residential unit.
Did you get any promotions when you were in the prison service?
No, I didn't. But I sort of got told to go for promotions, but I just didn't. After being like there for about 2.5 years, you just think like, I don't even know how to do the job myself properly, because I've learned off other people who don't know how to do the job either. So you just sort of stuck in a loop where you're learning from your own sort of mistakes and stuff. So I didn't want to go for promotions, even though I was like very competent to do so. About blowing my own trumpet, like the only thing I did was I was on a residential unit, and it was quite a bad one. And I stayed on there for a couple of years, and then a job came up in the sort of like the first night centre. Which was quite a nice place to work. You have to work the bigger hours and like longer shifts. Because you're taking in prisoners from like the courts at night, but it was a lot quieter, and like there wasn't as many incidents to deal with down there, so I moved down there.
And was that like a bit of an easier day-to-day life, was it?
You go in sort of knowing where your head's at, then you're like, I know who's coming on the night, who I'm going to have to deal with, what my job usually, like what my role's going to be on the day, and like it was quite easy going. There's still stuff you got to deal with, and you've got to move prisoners around. It's still hard work, you're moving people around, but it wasn't as like dangerous as in incidents. But sometimes you go in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the courts haven't finished, and then like you'd be taking prisoners in from the reception, gone midnight, and then expected to turn up the next day. That was the only problem with that sort of place to work.
Do you know what you're saying there as well? Like you said, I don't want to go for a promotion because I feel like I can't do this job yet. And I almost feel like those kinds of people, those conscientious types, are almost deterred from saying, right, I'm going to move up the ladder. And it's almost like the people who are in denial about the fact that the day-to-day is difficult then go up the ladder. And I think that's a systemic issue, which I've seen in a lot of different things. Like, who are the people who actually go for promotions? Do they really have their finger on the pulse, and do they know do they even care what it's like for the people below them? Or is it just get on with it? I'm here, you're there, you do what I say kind of thing. Do you know when you went into the prison, to what extent do you learn the hierarchy within the prisoners themselves? Is that something that you develops over time? Like, is there like a prisoner on the wing who's like the dominant prisoner, and to what extent do you appreciate that? Again, you know, I'm going from like what I've seen on the media, you know, like the top dog.
As in like people on the prisoners on the wing. And
Yeah.
See, like, you do learn. Usually the worst, the sort of sneaky, the worst ones who were like the top dogs were usually the ones you put the most trust in as well, because you put the trust in to have a good job. So like a good job in prison is like a cleaner on a wing.
Yeah.
Like, you're mopping up and stuff, but you're out your cell all day,
Yeah.
and all you're doing is just hanging around on the wing. You can go and use the telephone when you like, and they're the ones you put your trust in, but they're the ones running around doing the deals and getting stuff done inside. So you always like that. What we got, you're not friends, but you're friendly. Do you know what I mean? And you always knew like they were up to something, so you always kept a close eye on them. But also at the same time, like by having them on side, you could have the rest of the wing on side. Which was it's quite a weird emotion to go through when like you've got your staff and the people who are keeping you safe and keeping like the wing running safe, and then you've got to have them. You've got to work together with them, and then at the same time, you're going back after like locking everyone up and then talking about how you got to keep this person happy in such a way that like they keep the rest of the wing sort of on side.
Yeah, and this is something which, like, governors and managers might not necessarily acknowledge, but it's just something you learn.
Yeah, like
when you're in there.
When you got when I went into started prison service, it went on the wing. 190 prisoners on the wing, 5 staff. So you've got to have something about you.
Yeah.
Where you've got to work with people. You can't just go in saying, do this, do that, I'm the boss.
Yeah.
Because you're going to either get hurt or you're just not going to get anywhere. You're going to get hurt, basically. I'm not trying to say, like, oh, we didn't have control of the wing.
Yeah.
Because half the time you didn't. I mean, like, it was the prisoners.
Yeah.
The well-being and the goodwill of the prisoners kept prisons running. It wasn't the staff half the time. There's 5 of you on a wing trying to... I worked, when I was mainly on my residential unit, I worked on the middle landing, the 3s, and you've got I'm looking after 60 prisoners on that landing. So if I had 2 minutes to talk to every single one of them, that's 120 minutes I've already wasted in my day.
Yeah.
Just trying to deal with 2 minutes of every single person's problem.
Yeah.
So you just have to work with all the people on the wing, and especially your cleaners, who were the ones who kept the wing running.
Yeah. But they're also probably doing
the worst bits, like doing your dodgy deals. And
so by dodgy deals, like, is that to do with drugs, mobile phones?
They both. But what they do, this is where it just falls apart, because like what they do is they wouldn't have the mobile phones themselves, they wouldn't have the drugs themselves. They'd have people doing it for them, and sort of working for them on the wing or elsewhere. So people are doing all the running around for them. They're not going to get caught or done because they've not got anything on them.
Yeah, I mean,
a bit like Al Capone, you know what I mean? Like, you can't. Al Capone used to go around smiling, didn't he? Everyone in Chicago loved him, but
he wasn't doing the dirty.
He wasn't doing the dirty bits, was he?
I mean, he got him on tax evasion in the end, didn't he? Do you know the danger of drugs and mobile phones in the prisons? I mean, the prisoners are meant to go in there. They're basically intimate relationships are gone. You can't contact anyone on the outside, and in this global age with Facebook and all that, that's a big punishment in this day and age, isn't it? You can't take any illegal substances. How much of a problem are those things, phones and drugs, in the prisons, and what are the other dangers or things that are going wrong in prisons?
So your mobile phones, even though you've cut, like, say you can't contact your family and friends and stuff, when they had mobile phones in the cells, they wasn't using them to contact the friends and family. They was to contact like their associates and their colleagues on the outside who were doing the drug running and the whatever sort of crimes they were committing outside. They continue committing them from the inside because they're having people do it for them, which is what they used to do. In terms of drugs was the worst one, because what you'd have is you'd have people getting caught on purpose to come inside prison to then sell drugs at an inflated price. So they'd conceal drugs on themselves, or they'd go in prison. They can get, like, what they used to do before they started photocopying letters. They used to lace the letters with drugs and then send them in, and then you'd roll it up into like a cigarette, and you could smoke it then, like your spice. Smoke it in a cigarette, and that's what they sort of like started doing. So people get caught on purpose, bring the drugs in, and they sell it for an inflated price and make loads of money.
How does someone bring drugs into a prison? What ways would they do that?
Maybe concealed.
Concealed up the backside.
Up the back passage, yeah.
And the incentive to make money is that much that they're willing to do things like that. So they would wrap them up in a condom or whatever.
It's like a Kinder egg.
Yeah.
Close the Kinder egg and wrap it up in a condom and put it up.
Yeah.
And plug it.
What, do you know these people who used to swallow it and then it go through? Is that too dangerous because it might burst?
Yeah, you usually didn't do that.
Yeah.
And in the prison I worked in, before we got like when you go on holiday and you go in the airport and you go and stand in the machine, you stand there and it scans you.
Yeah.
Before we got one of them in, which was like quite a big deal and quite expensive, there was no real way of checking if they had drugs up the back passage, because they could check mobile phones because you've got metal detectors and whatnot. Like you can wand them and make them sit on this machine that could check for electric equipment or for mobile phones, but there was nothing really that it could check for drugs.
Yeah. So mobile phones, you can stop them getting in. Drugs, you could start getting scanners which would stop them getting into the prison.
Yeah, you could.
Would that be available at all prisons or just certain ones or what?
Not all of them, but I'm sure they're probably rolling them out as we speak. But it was rolling them out when I was still there, so you're talking like a couple of years ago. So in 2018-19, the prison still had no way of scanning people to check their insides like they do in the airport.
Once someone gets in with a fairly small amount of drugs, and then they've sold those drugs, how do they then restock or resupply? Do more people come in from the outside deliberately getting called to give it to them? Or, I mean, are you privy to this info? Basically, there was a market for drugs in the prisons. People would get arrested so they can go in and deal drugs. And then you would get in there and by hook or by crook, drugs are getting into that prison. Yeah.
So there was a few ways they could get in. So they could, more people could come in and conceal it and get caught and start selling the drugs for other people, or the gang lords of the prison, or the people on the outside, or they could throw it over the fence on a night, usually, and then fish hook it in from throwing it over a fence. They could use drones. Became a problem for a while, so they used drones, and then there's staff as well.
So the staff are led on to.
Yeah.
So one way or the other, it's getting in there, isn't it? How much of a problem did that cause for the day-to-day running of the prison, but also to, do you think, prisoners' health? I mean, people say like, oh, you go in to prison and then you come out more hardened and addicted to drugs. What's your kind of perspective on that?
First of all, you've got the people taking the drugs. So that's affecting their mental well-being, their health, family. They're staying in prison because of that. They're going to keep causing crime because they're still addicted to drugs when they leave the prison. So that's on an individual level.
Did they have drug tests while you're in there? Or?
Some people did. You'd have random drug test or a suspected one. It's usually the random one. And when you get that, and you get caught or you get found guilty, sort of like it comes up positive, you go for an adjudication. Sort of an internal court system where the governor would sit there and deem you guilty or not. You can get added days, you can get days on basic, you can get days down to segregation, and it's just what an internal judge. But on an individual level, that's what the drugs are affecting them sort of people, the people taking it. But then the biggest problem what I found, and I had the biggest problem with the drugs, was basically is that people are selling the drugs, so there's money involved, and once there's money involved, that's when you start having problems on your wing, because then you've got people owing money, you've got people shifting and moving for, as you say, like the top dog on the wing, and that's when you get violence, and that's when you get people fighting and harming each other, and people getting paid to sort of harm other people and cause violence to other people. And that was probably the biggest issue I had with drugs, because it did make my job and my life a lot more harder, just on the fact that people are fighting over money and power within the prison.
So phones come in, allow people to operate outside while they're in. Drugs come in and cause a whole host of problems for everyone. and then the drugs and the power thing, was drugs interlaced with the power thing? Was the power inside basically tied to drugs?
Yeah.
Because ultimately you got people in there with a lot of time on their hands, and to get high, to have a distraction, it's a big incentive, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of them will think, oh, well, I'm in prison, so it's not like I've got a fantastic record anyway. It's like, would you say that that's the key problem then, the drugs and the power relating to drugs in the prison?
Yeah. Because if there was no drugs in prisons, there'd be no people trying to take power or trying to get money and trying to run operations. And then there'd be no people in debt.
Yeah.
And then because there's no people in debt, and then there's not, the mental well-being's getting better and the health's getting better, the prison could run properly then.
Yeah.
Your wing could run properly and you could have normal interactions with individuals who want to get better.
Yeah.
But because they were just causing more crime and they were causing more harm to themselves and getting in debt, they're getting more issues within prison than they would be out of prison.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't, they could leave prison in debt, it'd follow them. These people will get hurt, yeah. They want to get the money back one way or another. Like,
so the whole thing in drugs was that if you have money, a prisoner's meant to have money on them at any point.
no, so in prisons you don't have money on you. You get like credit from money being sent in from your family or your friends, or you work in the prison and you get money every day for working, and you get credit, and you use that credit for like your phone, so you can get like a telephone attached to the wall. You get phone credit for that.
Would sometimes relatives of people inside pay for the drugs outside, which meant that they'd get it inside as well? Yeah.
So sometimes they even have, you check someone's credit, see where money's come from, and if you're giving a prisoner money, you've got to tell me who you are. If you don't tell me who you are or give them proper credentials, you don't get, the money doesn't get to them. And what you find is relatives of somebody in the prison will be sending money to a different person within the prison to pay for their drugs or the debt.
And that's often to just keep them from physical harm as well, even if they're not condoning it. How dangerous is day-to-day life in a prison for a prison officer? And how dangerous is day-to-day life in a prison for the average prisoner, and also what you might call a vulnerable prisoner? So we'll start with prison officers first.
So your day-to-day life as a prison officer, I make this comment to friends or whatever. This is the best way to explain it. So it's like the Colosseum.
Yeah.
And like you go in there, you might have survived that day.
Yeah.
And then the next day you've got to go back in, and that's the way you sort of come to terms with it, because every day something would happen.
Yeah, so things are always turning up that you just can't expect or predict or whatever.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter what incident it was, going to be a different incident all the time.
Yeah.
Be a different incident every day, but you just don't know when it was going to happen or where.
Yeah.
It might not be. I never got properly armed. Things happened to me. I got booted and I got bitten.
Yeah.
And I got spit on and things like that.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't happen every day.
Yeah.
But like some prisoner would get in a fight with somebody, or a prisoner would destroy his cell to the point where you have to remove him from the cell, or someone would rub feces on themselves on the walls, or a prisoner would take too much spice and then he'd be passing out and nearly dying, and then you've got to go and deal with everything every day. Every day was something going on.
Yeah.
There was never a day where I went in where the general alarm didn't go off and I had to attend something or deal with something on the spot.
That's quite a bit of mental pressure, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, does it take a while to sometimes process that after the event?
Yeah, of course, it can take ages. I was on a night once, and a prisoner hung himself to nearly death, where it sounded like he was drowning.
Yeah.
But he was like, not obviously in water, he was in the back of an ambulance. It sounded like he was drowning.
Yeah.
What the ambulance crew said, it was that his muscles was contracting. All his muscles in his arms and his legs were contracting, and what it was doing was just drawing the blood from it to go to his brain, to save him from dying, basically, into his organs. And I remember someone telling me he's going to die. Like, he was not going to make it. He survived in the end, he lived. But like...
But he basically caused that much damage to his throat that his body going into shock was getting as much blood from the limbs and channeling it to the brain as it could to try and keep him alive. Yeah.
All these muscles and his tendons were contracting and then expanding again. So it was like sort of his arms and legs were sort of coming in and out.
So
to deal with that, like I didn't deal with it there and then, did I? Because I had to deal with it in. But obviously, like, as time went on, it plays more in your mind. But the one way you deal with it was you make jokes about it. You watch films and you see like TV programs, and some people on the TV programs, or you're watching like, they're in the army or they're in the police force or something in some sort of pressured job, and they make a dark joke, and like as watching it as like a normal civilian person, you'd be like, oh, sounds a bit dark, that's a bit like rough, but like they'll be all laughing about it. That's what you do, you know. Like
it's like a coping mechanism.
Yeah, it was a big coping mechanism in the darkest sense of humour.
The gallows humour. I think.
I could tell you. I'll tell you what. One thing. That guy who nearly died.
Yeah.
I was with my mate. Well, it was a colleague. It was a good lad. It was either a colleague and he's a mate, and we went in with the ambulance crew. I have 2 prison officers.
Yeah.
To a prisoner who's going out of the prison to make sure like
nothing else happens.
Nothing else happens or whatever. We went to the emergency room, and like the doctors were around and the nurses and that, and we had to like stand in the emergency room watching. And a nurse came up to us and said, "Oh, do you have to stay? Like, you have to stay in here, like, watching him." And then my mate went, "We've got to make sure he doesn't run off."
Yeah, just
the guy's dying.
Yeah.
Like, she just like shook her head and called us something and walked off.
Yeah, well, but again, it's kind of like that's true. But in its absurdity,
like, he was taking the mick, like he was laughing. He said, like, this guy was like, on death's door, like,
yeah. But it's true to a degree. You're not going to leave him by himself, even if he isn't.
No, he couldn't leave him by himself.
You know what I mean?
He was saying, "No, we're going to make sure he doesn't run off." Like, he's nearly dead.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I mean, that's again, when you're in there and you're dealing with that. That's how you process what's going on, isn't it? It is like a coping mechanism.
You literally used to make the dark all day. You'd be joking. The darkest of jokes. But yeah, like every day there'd be something going on. It might not be harmful to you. It might be mentally harming to watch everything happen every day and go in and out. And every day you're doing something that's not a normal person in TK Maxx and Asda wouldn't be dealing with.
Yeah.
But like, you might not get physically there, but it'd be like mentally draining every day.
Yeah.
So that was like what it was dangerous about. But like, it was when usually prisoners wouldn't attack staff or go for staff; they'd go for each other, and staff might get involved and get armed. It'd be very limited amount of times when they'd actually like go for staff.
Yeah.
And because it just wasn't a demeanour to it. There's no incentive to attack staff.
Yeah.
Unless you were proper like audible to.
Do you know, when it comes to the prisoners themselves, obviously you get power struggles with like top dogs and stuff, but what was it like for the average prisoner day to day in terms of threat? And what would it be like for the vulnerable prisoners? And I want to talk to you about mental health in prisons as well, like, you know, what's your analysis? Anyway, let's look at the threat issue first, and then maybe we can explore vulnerable. But what was it like for the average prisoner?
So like, say me and you committed a crime and we went into prison.
Yeah.
Like an average person.
Yeah.
So as an average person, if you went into prison, you kept your head down and worked with staff and stayed away from like certain individuals in the prison, you would be generally okay to threats. The only thing that might happen is if you looked weak or sort of like was viewed as like someone who could be easily influenced. Someone might drag you into something you might not want to be dragged into, or you might get asked to do something you don't want to do, but if you don't do it, then there might be consequences to those. But if you just kept away from them sort of people, had a decent cellmate who was alright and you got along with him, you could easily get through prison. But it was the people who were involved in the drugs and the mobile phones and taking the drugs and working with or for the people who were dealing the drugs. If you're on the wrong side of certain people, or it's a whole debt issue again, like the threat would be a much more increased. If you're in debt in prison, you're under a lot of threat, basically. So if you were someone who took drugs and you were addicted to drugs, and then you didn't have a lot of money, and you were buying drugs off people in the prison, your threat would be a lot more increased.
Do you know, for a vulnerable prisoner, now I know that there's a high incidence of people with mental health problems going into prisons. What was your perception of that, and what was the threat level like for these more vulnerable types? And I don't necessarily mean, well, actually that might include to themselves.
What, as in like people with a lot of mental health issues and in prisons there'd be a lot of staff, and there'd be a lot of nurses and a lot of like mental health help that you could get. But for those individuals who were mentally vulnerable, and also it was also an educational thing.
Yeah.
If they weren't very well educated, they were more likely to be a lot more vulnerable. And to process things going on in the prison, or process what's going on like at court and things like that. So they'd be on a lot of like, they'd be more susceptible to mental health. But with the mental health, it was always intertwined with drugs. Always intertwined with drugs. So if someone had mental health issues and they come into prison, they might fall back on drugs. If someone had drugs and then came to prison, they definitely have come into mental health issues. So it was always one or the other, no matter what the sequence was. And then the threat to themselves was greatly increased, because they might be on a cell on their own, they might be, as I said, be on that suicide watch where it's like an act, as we'd say. So the threat to themselves is a lot bigger. But then, because of the drug situation, they might start to get into sort of debt and situations with other individuals in the prison, and be easily influenced and manipulated and controlled by individuals. So it was not a good place to be for people with mental health issues. Most of the prisoners had mental health issues, whether it just be depression or anxiety and things like that, but then they start to develop like sort of borderline personality disorders, and they develop more serious sort of mental health.
And as you say, if you've already got a mental health issue, going into a prison's probably not going to help very much, is it? Did you ever see people get seriously injured on your wing, or killed or kill themselves? I mean, how often is something like that happening in it?
I think since I started in that prison, for the full 2.5 years to 3 years or so, there was at least a death every sort of 3 months or so, 3 to 6 months, whether it be self-inflicted or someone's inflicted on them. I remember someone got murdered on a night in a prison cell, but it was more likely that they'd done it to themselves. And the people who did it to themselves were the most quiet about it. They'd go screaming, shouting, saying, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this." Or every day, I'd hear someone say, "I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to hurt myself." Every day was that someone would say that to me, whether it be for attention or to get what they want. Because that's what it usually was. It was like, if I don't get what I want, or I need some more food or anything like that, right, I'm going to kill myself. Do you know what I mean? Or I'm going to do this to myself. And if you knew the person, you just sort of go, right, ignore it. They're just saying it for attention. And it was the people that didn't say anything that usually died.
They were the dangerous.
Usually passed away. I remember there was a fella, and he got brought back to prison, didn't get his parole, and then he killed himself on a night.
But did you have shift work as a prison officer? Like, do you have to work night shifts, or did you rotate? It's like an 8-hour thing, is it all?
So you'd have a shift pattern, and you'd do 2 sets of nights in a year. So it was like a 6 monthly sort of like. And you do a set of nights every 6 months, which was you'd turn up about 8 o'clock at night, and then do it till about 7:30, 7 o'clock in the morning on a night. And all you do, everyone was away in the cells, and you just attend like the cell alarms if they've got any problems, and then check on your acts, which were your suicide watches. You just check on them when they were clocked in. So on an act, there's a big orange document. It says how many observations they have in an hour or so, and they have to be random, because like if you're if you really want to kill yourself, and I was like, I'm going to check you every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
On that time when I check you, you're obviously going to do it afterwards, aren't you?
Yeah.
So you have to do it randomly, like 4 times in an hour. So I could check on you 3 minutes in, then 6 minutes in, then 1 minute in again, and then 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
And that hour would be complete, but it was random, it was infrequent. And that's what you do on a night, basically, just to make sure everyone...
Could someone say, I want to do more nights for like getting a bit more pay or whatever?
So what people, if they couldn't do the nights, they'd swap and change with people. Nights were the easiest job in the prison. Apart from the fact that you lose your sleeping pattern, you do a week of nights, and after the week of nights you get a week off. So that was a big incentive for people to want to do more nights. But there were a very limited amount of nights. So the nights were really easy. And it was the easiest job to have. So a lot of people sometimes just did full-time nights.
Yeah.
But in your 6-month shift pattern, what I do is, there'd be each shift, like a morning shift, and then there's an afternoon, there's an evening, and that's what usually there is. So in my prison it was like 7 to 9 was the working hours.
Yeah.
7 in the morning till 9 at night. Now you could walk in at 7 in the morning and work till 9 at night, and that might be a shift for the day. It's like 13 and a half hours?
Yeah.
So that could be a shift. You could sometimes just walk in, you're 7 o'clock till 12:30. That was a morning shift. You do a night, like a late, which is like 12 till 9. And then you do 7:30, 7:30, or 7:30, 5:30. So it very varied day to day. What they usually do was, like, say you had an early shift, so you do 7:12, then you get afternoon off. The next day you might be off, then the day after you might come in on a late, so you get a bit of an extended day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be nice like that, but there was one shift pattern I remember when I first started, and I worked 9 days on a row, without a break, without a day off. Because what you do is you work every other weekend, and then a prison officer's working week starts on a Sunday. So there was a union, the POA, the Prison Officers Association. You're not allowed unions in the prison. What they'd agreed on was that you'd have at least 2 days, like a weekend, so 2 days in a row was your weekend. So you'd have 2 days, a weekend off every 2 weeks. You'd have at least 1 day in the week off, and I think that was all that was agreed, really.
Do you know the Prison Officers Association?
Yeah.
Although you weren't technically allowed to strike, they were in fact a union, but they couldn't threaten to strike. That was like one of the conditions. So if you would you have a rep in each prison and you could go and see them if there were any issues? How effective do you think the POA was?
So there's only one real union. It was that union.
Yeah.
Well, obviously it was an association. It's not a real association. And then you have reps within the prison. You'd have 3 or 4. Now, if you ever got in any trouble or something was going wrong, or you're getting interviewed for something, you could take a member of the POA with you.
Yeah.
Or you could go for them for advice, and you'd have like sort of a main sort of rep for the prison who'd then like be in charge of like delegating what the other reps do, basically. And they'd get actual like sort of time off to put aside for union work. But here's a whopper for you. In the prison I worked in when I first started, the Prison Officers Association rep was married to the governor's, like the assistant governor or something like that. He was married to a governor. She wasn't a governor's assistant, sorry, that's what she became afterwards, but she wasn't at the time, but she...
Yeah, I've seen similar things in schools.
There's some...
Dodgy.
Yeah.
Would you... Did they have national issues like working conditions, or was that all kind of... You just go to your rep for like an internal issue or whatever?
It was usually internal issues, but if there's any national issues that were going on, or the Prison Association sort of felt like we weren't getting enough, or the pay rise wasn't coming in, or they would strike. There was one day, in my whole like sort of 2.5 to 3 years I worked, there was one day where they striked, and I weren't in. I was on holiday, but like That's only one day they did.
Yeah. So they did do national things.
And it's not even it's a walkout. They call it a walkout.
Yeah.
You just go to work, you clock in, and then you walk out the building.
Yeah.
And then they'd leave staff to run the wings, basically.
Yeah, because obviously you can't abandon that duty as it were. The prisoners themselves, like, was there opportunities for education, for doing meaningful work in all the prisons? There's often like criticisms I've seen that like, oh, they're sitting in the cells all day, they're playing on games, they're watching the telly, they're getting in trouble, etc. But if a prisoner went in and they wanted to like use their time well, what kind of day-to-day stuff was available for them? You know, they had recreation and time outside, etc. But what was it like day-to-day for a prisoner? You know, there's been people saying that like prisoners, because of cuts, etc., which we'll come to in a minute, prisoners are just left in the cells all day or to just entertain themselves. What's your view on that?
Well, the prison I worked in, it's different from every prison to every prison. The prison I worked in didn't hold prisoners for very long. So the things available in my prison was very limited.
Yeah.
I started work, like, there was education, so if you came into prison you had a very limited education.
Yeah.
The first thing you'd do when you come into prison, you do like a maths and English test.
Yeah.
And if you didn't get good enough in that maths and English, very, very limited, like you're talking like, not like GCSE, like very, very like SATs.
Yeah.
Like probably that sort of age.
Yeah.
If you couldn't achieve the right amount of score in that, then you'd go to education.
Yeah.
And the education would be taught by teachers. They're not qualified teachers, but they still could teach the subject. But so you'd have maths, English, there'd be computing, sort of ICT.
Yeah.
And then there'd be sort of like arts and crafts, which you could do in my prison.
Yeah.
But if you pass them tests, then you'd go into work. Now, as a convicted prisoner, you have to work.
Yeah.
If you're on remand, you don't have to.
Yeah.
But if you're a convicted prisoner, you have to do something.
Remand is when you wait to go to court.
Yeah, so a remand prisoner is a person who's been unconvicted.
Yeah.
So they might have like evidence against you.
Yeah.
Enough to keep you in prison.
Yeah.
So if you're convicted, you have to work.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you get put on your basic, and like the incentives get taken away from you, and you get less and less.
Would they have to work every day or?
Yeah, every day. So you can work a morning or afternoon. You can work both.
Yeah.
And
that was down to you, to your choice.
Yeah, it was down to the individual's choice. Some people didn't want to work in the morning; they work in the afternoon. Some people worked in the morning.
Yeah.
And then working after. Some people worked all day, and then they get the evening association. So if you worked in the morning and you had the afternoon off, you'd get your association, your shower, and your phone call, and you're walking about on the yard. You get that in an afternoon.
Yeah.
If you worked in the afternoon, you get the morning off, and you do all the association. Then if you worked both, then you get the evening association.
Yeah.
And most people work both to get out of the cell more all day. You get them out. The time out of the cell was the biggest incentive to prisoners. So if they worked both morning and afternoon, then they get more time out of the cell there, and then in the evening they get from around 6 o'clock till 7:30 out the cell.
Yeah.
So you'd be out your cell all day basically, which was what they wanted to do. To like walk around and do whatever they want, because time in cells a long time. It's like watching a boiling kettle in it.
Yeah.
It's going to be a longer time in your cell to do. So in my prison there was sewing shop where they make like towels and clothes for the prison.
Yeah.
There'd be cooking, which would like you're cooking for the prison.
Yeah.
There'd be like doing your rubbish bin runs and things like that. So you'd be collecting all the rubbish, and then you'd be cleaners on your wing, and then there'd be a tea bag place where you make. So in prisons on an evening, when you get your tea, you get like a tea pack with like milk, tea bags, sugar, coffee, whiteners, and that you get like as a pack as your morning meal sort of thing, because you get cereal with it as well. And that's what they'd make there. And that's what there was really for working in my prison.
Cool. So you could theoretically, if you weren't up to the educational level you'd go to get that support, you could use your day productively, and you could actually maybe do certain jobs where you could learn stuff as well. You know what I mean? Just in terms of the pay as well, I mean, I should have mentioned this with the POA thing. I think you said that like wages declined in recent years with austerity. I know that you went in after austerity had started and you came out within like 3 years, but what was your impression of austerity and its impact on prisons? And what was the pay like for a prison officer?
So when I first started, it was a band 3 prison officer. You'd get about, you're talking out of London, so London you get paid a bit more because you live in London, but in the north, I think I started on about 22,000 a year before tax.
Yeah.
So I've been taking
Before tax?
Yeah, before tax.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, before tax. So when after tax and stuff like that, I'd be taking on about 1,400 quid, something like that. I think it was about that. But while I was there, we got little increments from you get increments for being there longer.
Yeah.
So I think there's about 5 years, and then you reach that max cap then.
Yeah.
It's like, by the time I'd finished, I was on like the 3rd year. So I was taking on about 1,500 quid. But that was also, the government gave a couple of percentages every year. At the time, I think it was when Boris Johnson was coming in, trying to make friends, and he started to increase sort of wages for teachers. I think was it teachers, army and nurses and prison staff. And the prison officer was actually one of the biggest increases. And it was like by the time I finished, it was about 6% I had increase, which is quite a lot. When you consider how much you're taking home.
What was the impact of austerity, or what did people say to you with the effects of austerity on the prison service?
So, what was that, like 2012, 2000?
Yeah, I mean 2010, but they probably kicked in about. I know, like in education, it was in 2012 that reforms really started to kick in.
So what they did was, I remember spoke to a lot of older staff who were there, been there quite a while. Like your older staff who were there before austerity were all like ex-army, ex-forces. So they'd been in other jobs and then left them jobs, quite like career-driven people. Do you know what I mean? So you had a lot of people who knew what they were doing before austerity. This was like before the money thing comes in. This is what the main one was. So you had a lot of people who knew what they were doing in the prison service and knew how to run a prison properly, with a lot of staff and a lot of decent staff who were there. Like you wouldn't get a lot of 21-year-olds in a prison. You'd get a lot of 40-odd-year-olds who have been there, done that, and got the t-shirt and come in, and they've got experience and life experience behind them. Now after that, what they did was they cut it, the amount of staff, by about 2/3. I think it was quite a lot. When I speak to all the staff, they used to talk about like having 3 officers to a landing. Then you'd have like 2 officers doing fabric checks, 2 officers doing cell searches. You'd have 2 officers on movements, and there was a lot of staff, and it was easy days, and you don't have to. When you deal with people then and incidents, you dealt with them properly, and a lot of people wouldn't fight back against you. So you were talking like 15, 18 staff to a wing when I was on 5 staff. So that was one of the biggest impacts. They cut the staff.
2/3.
It was quite a lot. And it wasn't just the fact that you couldn't staff who knew what they're doing. And then after that, like, it was never the same. And that's what you always talk about. So you're talking quite a lot of staff were cut.
I mean, I remember all that happening, and there was lots on the media about all the cuts to the prison service. And I spoke to a couple of prison officers as well about it all, and they were like, you know, it's terrible to see the impact on the front line, but I mean, that's pretty dramatic, and in many ways prisons, it's a bit of an easy target in terms of the politics of it, like, oh, screw the prisoners, they've made bad choices, but it's the impact on the prison officers. One of the things I've noticed about teaching, again, particularly since austerity, is a lot of the young teachers coming in, they don't know anything different, and I look at them and think, you know, I'm 44. I look at them and go, you won't be able to sustain this. And is that the feeling that you got from some of the older prison officers talking to the younger ones?
Yeah.
Or?
So when they cut the staff. and they never really built it back up. But then what you'd have staff leaving who've been there 10 years, and they're getting replaced by people like me who've never been there in their life and only just come out of university. So that's the staff who were in austerity and gone through austerity. They would have been on about £30,000 a year, so about £10,000 more than what I've been on. Fair enough, they've been in the prison service quite a long time, but that wasn't why they were getting paid more. It was just literally because of the cuts. And then you'd have staff leaving because to them they knew different. They was like, oh, I remember how good this job used to be. I don't want to do this anymore. So they'd leave, and if that'd be good for the governors, the governor was be putting their thumbs up because that's £30,000 off their pay packet. Now it's 20,000, so they cut it in half. So they'd be putting thumbs up, going, yeah, buzzing. Our governor wanted all the staff to leave. He wanted them to leave because it's more expensive.
Did he actually say that? Or?
Well, no, but that's how he worked. That's how he operated. You could tell that. That's how he operated. A very mercenary style of operating his prison, and so yeah, he'd be happy because the pay packet being decreased. So he could have put money elsewhere or do whatever he wants with money, but he'd have the same amount of staff for the less money. And that was what he wanted. But so they'd be getting replaced by people like me who didn't know what they were doing. And then by the time I got there, which was how many years after austerity, I'd be learning off people who'd been there like a year, who had not learned off people who'd been there 10 years. And it was the experience, and it was the sort of like ripple effect of experience then of sort of like, imagine opening up a prison now and then the staff have been there a year and then you go in and you're like trying to learn off somebody who's learnt off somebody who's learnt off somebody who don't know what they're doing. And that's like sort of the ripple effect. I was learning off people who, hats off to them, they were doing the job and they're trying to do it to the best ability, but they weren't doing it properly. So I'd be learning things off them that wouldn't be the best thing to do.
I mean, I remember at one point about 6 years ago, I think something like 50% of teachers were leaving after a year or two, or in the first 5 years, because of the impacts of austerity and the ruthless inspection systems which were introduced by Gove. But again, austerity, depends how it's done. Like when people say, listen, we need to do this for these reasons. But I remember like those politicians like cheering that kind of thing through. And then what you're doing is
saving the money.
Yeah, but they were cheering now. Like, it's all right saying, listen, we need to do this for this reason, but laughing their heads off in Parliament.
I remember the Cameron coming out and going, it's going to like, it's like the winter of discontent, we just got to get through it. Like, we all got to knuckle down and get through it, like, sort of thing. But no, you don't, because you're all right and the rest of us aren't.
Yeah.
It's not something you have to get through.
I think one of the issues is it's when you get millionaires passing policies and cheering about it, which is what a lot of those people are. Not all of them are millionaires in Parliament, but I think their average wage is much, 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 much higher, and their average social background is, they think it's funny. They alienate those people, but then still win elections because of the overall picture or whatever. But the net effect on the prison service, and I've seen it with education, I mean, the health service, we all know what the health service has been in crisis since October. And no one seems to care. Okay, maybe it's in the news a bit more now as the deaths increase with Omicron, but it's like that same kind of thing across society. In the long run, it's not really helping us, is it? That kind of de-skilling, taking the experience out of things and having people leave the job before the time. That just leads me into, I know you were in the prison service for 3 years. Do you want to talk about why you left, or would you rather not? I mean, that's just an open question.
What now? Right.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, you might not tell me like particular incidents, but what kind of reasons were there behind you saying this isn't for me, or leaving after only 3 years?
Well, it wasn't a career, and not just the pay. I didn't mind the pay. The pay was all right for my age. When I was like 21, 22, the pay wasn't bad. It was anything like that. It was like, it was just so frustrating. It was a very thankless job, in the fact that nobody was on your side. Nobody wanted to sort of, not even the prisoners cared. Like, even if you're helping them every day, you're helping them and they didn't care. And then the staff, the managers, there was very, very limited amount of people in there who were on your side and wanted you to stay for whatever reason. And it was just grinding it, and like, as I say, like, oh yeah, I wanted to go into different public services as the police, and it wasn't a career. It was never a career, and even the people who I joined with and all the people I met and sort of leave and go and like start and left, they didn't see it as a career, they saw it as a stepping stone to something better, which is what I initially thought of. But like, the longer I was there, the more I was like, oh, I could actually do this for quite a long time. But it was like, there was no incentive to. There was no one like wanting you to stay. Do you know what I mean?
That's sad, isn't it? I just think that's sad.
Say, like the governors and the managers, they didn't want you to stay. They weren't that bothered. He just wanted boots on the ground. And like, after like 3 years of just trying to get through it, trying to learn the job, you're just like, oh, I don't want to be here anymore, because it's just, I want to be in a job where you come to work smiling every day and you're laughing, and you want to meet better people and nicer people. You get when you spend so much, like, say, so what you spend like 6 to 8 hours sleeping, and then you spend 6 to 8 hours a day at work on average, don't you? In a week, you become like disassociated with like society, because you're meeting people who aren't in society. You start having conversations with people that you would never have conversations elsewhere, and then because you're like that, then you're doing that every day. You start getting this. Like, I go in the supermarket to make ready for a fight, because I was thinking, right, oh, someone might kick off here. You take it home with you. You try not to. You try and drive home and have a laugh and laugh it off and that, but it take a toll on you every day. It take a toll on you. Each day would take a little bit from you.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because like, I know like 2 or 3 prison officers, and one of them strikes me as I mean, they're all nice guys, but I've seen little sides to them where if something happens, they just kind of just switch slightly into the. How can I explain? You just develop a quite a cynical.
It's like an alter ego.
Yeah, like an alter ego. That's exactly what it is.
It's like an alter ego, yeah.
That's exactly what I was trying to.
I used to be at work, and I used to F and blind, and I used to shout at people, do this and do that, and I'd come home, and I'm like, "Hi, all right, how are you doing? How's your day been?" And you have to flick back to being that normal person who can represent society, and people get along with. Like, but when you're in the prison, you're dealing with people who aren't associated with society, and they're not in the social norms, and like, you don't meet drug dealers and you don't meet people on the streets when you're out and about in society. You hardly meet these people. When you do speak to them on the odd occasion, when they ask you for money or things like that, you think, oh, he's a bit like strange. The things like he's talking about, or the way he's acting is really strange, because they're so disassociated with society. And then you'd be engaging with people like that all day. You'd mould yourself into a person you're not. So every day you'd go to work, you're being someone you're not. And then it's almost like putting, as soon as you get your baton and your keys in, it's almost like you're putting a suit on of somebody else.
I mean, you can be professional and say, right, I'm in this role, but there's something not quite right when that's too different to how you really are, and then you feel like you're not even valued for doing it. You know, long term, that's not good, is it? Do you know the governor, just getting to the role of the governor, obviously you can have different personalities who are governor, etc. What was the role of the governor by the time you left? Like, what was your impressions of the governor as a role, not necessarily the individual you had, but what was their job?
So there'd be different types of governors in prisons. So, as I said, you can have, so I'd be a prison officer, there'd be a supervising officer, then there'd be a manager, your custodial manager, and then there'd be sort of your residential governors, and then above them are like the top dog, the number one governor is your governing governor. He's the governor of the governors. So he's your number one, and that's what you call him, your number one governor. So his role was all about managing finances and external problems, and his role wasn't to do with like every day-to-day stuff. It was to do with overarching policies and bringing in bigger things from regional sort of. I don't know.
Did you think that they were helpful things that he was doing, or that the governor would do?
See, so obviously every prison's different, but my governor was very mercenary. He was very cutthroat. I remember the first time I started my job, you'd have a meeting with the governor before you start your job, and he'd sit you all around, all the new trainees or the recruits or whatever, and he'd sit you all around a table, and he'd give you like the 10 reasons why I'm going to sack you speech. You do this, I'm going to sack you. If you make this mistake, I'll sack you. If you open a door and leave it open, I'm going to sack you. He'd speak. That's how he'd speak to you. It wasn't like, right, okay, thanks for joining the prison service. I hope we can accommodate you here in this prison, and that your time here is really good, and we want to get you trained up and do really well. If you ever need anything, come speak to somebody or me. Or it wasn't like that. He'd sit you around and go, you leave a door open, I'm going to sack you. Last week, I sacked somebody for leaving a door open. That's going to be you if you do that. That's how he'd speak to you. That was my first.
So that's his first impression.
That was my first meeting with the governor.
I mean,
obviously, he'd give you that all like, oh, all right, welcome to this prison. He'd give you that all sort of little bit of a rigmarole, but he wouldn't be like, right, this is how we can support you. If you need mental health support, this is how we can help you.
Do you know if he said to you, right, welcome to the prison, I'm such and such, is what we can offer you, by the way, we are a prison dealing with very vulnerable people, we're in difficult situations, people have been sacked for doing these things here, and he listed them and said, please do not do any of those, because you're going to leave me with a choice to have to sack you. It wasn't done like that.
No.
I mean, that's just...
It was literally like...
That's it. But straight away, that's your introduction. Then you're speaking to people who say, we don't value you, your boots on the ground, the quicker you're gone, the better. You're put in a difficult situation, stretched to the limit. What did he expect people to do? You know what I mean? Did he expect people to stay in those kind of conditions?
Wasn't just that, like, the training wasn't rigorous enough. It's not a job you can learn like on the spot. It wasn't even just that, like, so getting staff, they just accept anybody. And it's not a job where you can accept anybody. You need people who can deal with things and deal with situations and deal with people properly. But because there was such short-staffed, the retention rate in my prison was, for the first year, 60% of staff would leave.
You're joking?
No.
That's absolutely
ridiculous. The turnover was massive. It was one of the worst prisons to work, like not the worst prisons to work in, but one of the worst prisons for staff retention in the country.
That is absolutely
outside
ridiculous.
of London, it was one of the worst ones. And because the training wasn't rigorous enough, you go on, you sort of like a deer in headlights. And if you're a deer in headlights, you're going to make a mistake. And then you're defecating out your backside about making a mistake because you're going to get sacked or you're going to get in trouble, proper trouble. Like, you might let someone out when you're not supposed to let out. And you might hurt somebody and someone might get hurt because of you. And you've not got the support or the staff around you to tell you not to do things. So you were learning from mistakes. It's not a job you can learn from mistakes. Do you know what I mean? It's not, because the what do you call it? There was too much that could happen if you made a mistake. The stakes were too high to start making mistakes.
Do you know, like, obviously we're all bound by what we have to follow in our workplaces. So, like, a head teacher in a school has to follow what the government are doing, the inspections and all that, the finances and all that. What was your governor like? A politician? Was he just an administrator? Was there anything like to do with vision, or you know, what kind of a person is the average governor, do you think? Or what kind of person was your governor? You've already said ruthless, mercenary, cutthroat, but is that the only way to be if you're trying to cut by 2/3?
He struck me as the sort of person who wasn't like, right, I want to make this prison good, so the staff are well and the prison's working really well. It was like, I want to do well, so I can then do well and move up the ladder. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like he wanted staff to be looked after and treated well. He wanted the prison to be working efficiently on money-wise, so it was efficient money-wise, and make sure it's just working like sort of a limited capacity. Do you know what I mean? It's
Working with stressed resources.
Yeah, it's like at the best he can do with what he's got.
Yeah.
Not in like sort of way it's like, oh, I'm doing the best I can here. It's more like I want the best I can out of the least amount of money I can spend in this place.
Was there any incentive financially on him to do that, or was that just his role anyway? Or
well, I got told that he got bonuses, or people got bonuses if prisons saved money. So the ladder got more out of saving money.
Yeah.
And this is why it would make sense for him to want to get rid of your longer term staff who were on 30 plus grand.
I'm going to research that later.
Well, you can.
Because I'll research that later and I'll put it in the notes underneath that podcast, because I'd like to see if there is anything written about that. It may not be written down, but
no, but it's just
effectively that's what's happening.
Yeah, it would make sense, because why would he want to get rid of the better staff? Why would he want to get rid of the 10 to 12, 15, 20 year experienced staff who are the only difference is they're on more money?
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. We're on over an hour and a quarter now. Just if you could, what do people need to know about prisons? Like the general public, I could ask you like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of prisons, and do they reform people? Do they punish people? Do they protect society? Do they deter crime, etc.? But what do you think the role of prisons is, and what do you think people need to know in terms of what it's like on the ground? I mean, you've already said things are stretched to the limit. The prison officers' morale probably isn't very good right across the country. The prisoners inside aren't getting as good a deal because of that. Drugs are rampant in there. The hierarchies within are rampant. It just seems to be a money-saving exercise. What else would you say that people need to know about prisons? That's a big question.
It is a big question.
Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of prisons? What do you think people need to know?
I think what people need to know is it's the thin blue line, or it's a thin red line out there.
Yeah.
The staff are stretched massively, and the strain on staff is massive, and the sort of staff you're getting because you're paying such not low wages, and the people they try and get in their prisons. I'm not saying they're bad. They're just not capable of doing the job. And if you're getting people who are incapable of doing the job, then it's going to make it even harder for everyone else.
Yeah.
But it's just the stretch too thin. People aren't trained but well enough. Need more staff. The best way to make prisons better is investment. And you said before, people don't care about prisons. It's the last thing they want on Boris Johnson to say what's coming out of that briefcase is investment for prisons. And it's not about that, because you're saving yourself a lot of money by reforming people. The more people you reform, the more money you save.
Not only that, there's a lot of figures saying that the more money you spend on reform, you save.
Yeah.
More money in the long run. I think it was like 1 to 6. I think the other ones I heard, I don't know what the exact figures are. The most recent ones about the cost of putting one prisoner in a prison.
About 30 grand, I think.
Like,
30, 40 grand.
What are we spending that money for if it's not there? So if you're not making those people better and they come out and they're just going to go back into their communities and commit crime again. And again, we need to think about the communities that those people go back into. The average politician isn't thinking, I don't want this prisoner moving in next door to me unreformed or living on my street. Do you know what I mean? So we're spending that much money on them already for something that isn't working. And that has a longer term impact on everyone else, because ultimately, I mean, there's a lot of other countries. I've been looking at like the Scandinavian models of prisons. There are much better prison systems out there. For this kind of Anglo-Saxon model we've got, like in the States, the more baddies you lock up, the better. And then you start locking them up for more trivial reasons. We all know that a lot of it's to do with socio-economics and social justice, the kind of people who end up in prisons. It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So all that money, the staff feel completely disregarded, and then you're doing the prisoners a disservice as well. who you're meant to be helping. You know, it is meant to be about reform as well as punishment.
The punishment. So it's either you invest in the prisons, you invest in the prison service, make it really good for reform. You make prisons not a nice place to go, but a decent place to make people better.
Yeah.
Or you cut everything and you make the punishments the highest way possible, and you try it that way, but that way doesn't work. We've seen that in the past.
Yeah.
You make the prison as horrible as they can. It's all because what a prisoner is all changing with like the modern age. When it used to be in the 70s and 80s, you didn't have massive junkies and heroin addicts and people on spice. You didn't have anything like that. People like that going into prison. You'd have like your conventional prisoners who want to make money basically, and they go and do the time and they leave the prison. It might not necessarily reform, but at least the prison was a decent place where the staff were better kept and better treated and better trained to deal with people. Do you know what I mean?
If I said to you, prison should provide drugs for inmates, providing that they engage in a reform agenda, etc., and give them incentives to do it, would, in your judgment, would that be more effective than the current system?
As in like actual drugs?
Yeah. If the prison system was to say, right, who's on drugs, we're going to give you drugs in here, but we're going to get you off them.
Well, the only thing they do currently is they'll have like methadone and they'll have drugs.
They do have some of that.
Yeah, they've got like replacement drugs, haven't they? Pharmaceutical drugs, but I know what you mean. Like the end game is to get people off drugs. I mean, you delve into a deeper problem, but it all starts with like your society and how we deal with people outside.
Yeah,
people, getting people better education and jobs and.
I mean, ultimately, if you do that, prisons are less necessary. And you look around the world at the countries with the highest prison populations. You look at the countries around the world with the lowest prison populations. There are a lot of lessons out there. People say, "Oh, we can't be." Look around. I mean, politicians, for ideological reasons, may look abroad or may not, but we know that in the Scandinavian countries, like the reoffending rates are really low, etc. There's reasons for that. They have open prisons, families can stay in prisons, those kind of things. It just seems to me like the British model is just so old and outdated, and it almost comes from this kind of private school discipline.
It's this archaic idea that people should be punished.
Yeah.
It's not that they're getting punished half the time. It's not their problem. It's not their fault, sorry. They're born into a family or into a place or society where they've been... They fall through the net. And they fall through the net. The thing that catches them is being criminals and doing drugs. And going that sort of way. They fall through the net.
Once prison isn't a solution. Prison is almost an assessment of how a society is doing. Once people are ending up in prisons, there's reasons for that. And it's like the fact that people have ended up in prison, that's sad in the first instance.
Well, yeah.
They've got there. So then we're expecting prisons to perform miracles when really, things have happened in those people's lives to get them to that point.
You're expecting prison officers to be brothers and fathers and mothers and act like that sort of people and have that sort of support around these people who haven't got all that on the outside. You're expecting the prison service to be that for them, that support system that they can like sort of base their life upon. But it just isn't at the moment. You've got to have plans in place for people, and they do get houses and they do get homes when they get them to leave, and they do have that probation officer who do try and help them out. But how much help are we giving them to the point where there is enough houses out there and enough things out there for prisoners to go into, but then like as soon as they start taking drugs and things, they've got to leave. They can't stay there, and they've got to engage within like reform.
These are complex issues, and it's another case of where we need to let the evidence lead rather than the perceptions and the ideologies. We need to look at the evidence. And again, people will say, it depends which evidence you focus on, but we do need cross-party support for these things, and we need confidence to say we need to do what's right. I think in Finland, many years ago, I think all the parties agreed on educational reform and said, right, let's leave it for 15 years and see what happens. And I think prison needs something like this, but it's too much of a vote winner for certain people to use the victimisation of prisoners and to think, screw them, that's too much of a political tool for so many, isn't it? Right, it's an hour and 26. Charlie, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to check the current cost of prisoners per year, 30,000, and put it in the notes, which you said, and also whether there's incentives for governors. They may exist, but it might not be out in the public sector, so people out there can put some freedom of information requests. This has just been a bit of a discussion about what it's like working in prisons. Obviously for prisoners it's different. For the people impacted, the families of prison officers and prisoners, it's different. Things cost money, but what we're doing at the moment, it doesn't seem to be working, and we can certainly see prison officers a hell of a lot better, and we can certainly give our most vulnerable people in society more help than we currently are in ways that are effective and work better. So, Charlie, thank you very much for your time, and thank you all out there for listening. Please like, follow, share, get the word out there. This has been North and South Podcasts. Thanks again, Charlie.